Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Your Relationship With podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Snow. I'm a business relationship strategist and the founder of the Powerful Women Rising community, on a mission to help change the face of networking so that we can all network like humans and not like salesy weirdos. If you don't know what a salesy weirdo is, then you definitely need to follow me on Instagram. I've got a lot of reels that will tell you exactly what a salesy weirdo is. And I'm sure once you start watching them, you are going to be like, yeah, I've seen a lot of salesy weirdos in my lifetime, and maybe even been a salesy weirdo. It's okay. I have too. When you know better, you do better. Okay, so today is, I know I've said this before. I say this so many times, you guys probably don't even believe me anymore, but this actually might be my favorite podcast interview so far. I got to interview Kristen Carder. She's the host of the podcast, I Have ADHD. I found this podcast a little while ago, probably about 6 to 8 months ago, several months after being diagnosed with ADHD myself at age 41. Not a surprise that I had it, but actually got a diagnosis at age 41 and started treating and really figuring out, what does that actually mean? How is it affecting my life? What are the things that I thought were just like character traits that are actually ADHD, and how can I work with it rather than against it? And figuring out all the ways that my whole life I had tried to fit my square peg into a round hole, and all of a sudden it made sense why it wasn't working. And finding Kristen's podcast was super, super helpful for me in understanding so many of the nuances of ADHD. And if you are an entrepreneur with ADHD, if you have clients who have ADHD, if you have suspected that you might have ADHD, this is a great podcast for you to listen to, because ADHD is not just a buzzword for Kristen. She talks about how it's a trending topic on TikTok now, but this is really her life's work. She has learned directly from the foremost authorities in the industry, and she shares so much knowledge and so much goodness in this episode that is really going to help you to understand ADHD, what it is, what it isn't, how it might affect you in business, and how to work with it rather than against it. So I am super excited to share this episode with you, and would love if you would pop onto my Instagram and share your thoughts with me. I know you're going to love it just as much as I did. Hello, Kristen. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it is so great to be here with you.
Yes, I am so excited to talk to you. I was telling you before we started recording that I found you through your podcast, I Have ADHD, and that is the name of the podcast, but also I do. And it's such a good podcast. It's so much good information in there about if you are even questioning maybe I might have it, or you thought that you had it, but you don't know, is this really part of that? It's just like been so eye-opening for me. I can't recommend it enough. I tell everybody that I know that's like, I think I might have ADHD. I'm like, okay, well, listen to this podcast.
Thank you so much. That's so kind. I love having a podcast, and podcasting is something that's really hard for me, but having the podcast is super fun. And I also love to get to connect with people like you. So fun to be here.
Yeah. I'm excited for you to share your wisdom with my listeners today also. So let's talk first a little bit about, tell us just a little bit about you, what you do, and about your relationship with ADHD.
Well, a little bit about me. I am newly in my 40s and I have 3 kids. I live an hour outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and I work all day, every day as an ADHD coach. So I work with adults with ADHD who are wanting to move forward in a self-development journey. And I help people. I don't help people make a schedule or a plan. What I do instead is help people to accept their diagnosis and really understand it, and drop the shame and the drama and all of the self-judgment and the inner turmoil that comes with having ADHD, and just really step into like lives that they want to live. I think a lot of us are walking around living a version of life that somebody else kind of prescribed for us. And I think one of the steps on the ADHD healing journey is really understanding what life you want to live and what works for you. So I'm a podcaster, I'm a coach, and I just love people with ADHD so much. That's my relationship to ADHD. I love the ADHD brain. I love people with ADHD. And being able to serve a community that has for decades, well, actually since the beginning of time, been so underserved is such a privilege to me. I know now like ADHD is a trending topic on TikTok, but it's been a widely underserved community for so long. So to be able to be in that space, I feel like is such a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only underserved, but I feel like very misunderstood or under understood, if that's a word.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know we'll get into this, but so many people still think that ADHD is like a little boy bouncing around in a classroom. And so when a beautiful, professional, smart woman sits in front of them and says, I think I might have ADHD, most people will kind of give you the side eye and say, no, like you're too smart to have ADHD. You're too successful to have ADHD. You're too whatever, white, old, you fill in the blank. People just don't understand that ADHD does not discriminate and anyone can have it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's possible to live a successful, great, happy, calm, peaceful life with ADHD. And that was one of the things that you said that I found really, really empowering about your podcast when I first started listening to it, is this idea of I'm not trying to force you into living the way that neurotypical people live. There's a big joke in the ADHD community about like, how many planners do you own? And I'm not going to tell you how many planners I own. Every single year, I think this is the year.
This is the
planner.
Yeah.
But really embracing the fact that this is the brain that you have. This is how your brain functions. And so how do we maximize that as opposed to like continuing to try to force your square peg into the round hole?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the most important things about accepting your diagnosis. And I think it's one of the hardest things about understanding who you are, because literally from birth, we are conditioned to believe that we are the problem and that we do not fit into this society and that we need to change and modify ourselves to be more like everyone else. And that starts with our caregivers and, whatever. We could get into all of that, but we don't need to. Caregivers, school systems, even just like on a sports team, like I'm the one just kicking the dirt instead of paying attention to the soccer ball. And so moving on up through into adulthood, we have this deep-seated belief that we need to change to be like everyone else. And of course, we need to develop skills that help us to thrive in the system that we live. But also, if we really understand our brain and accept ourselves for who we are, we can make a lot of changes that will make our lives a lot easier if we just stop trying to do things like everyone else.
Yes. Yes. That was a huge motivation for me in starting my community, the Powerful Women Rising community, which is a virtual community for female entrepreneurs, is having a space for women who want to build businesses the way they want to build them and who want to build the kind of business that they want to build and who don't want to feel like they have to show up in the entrepreneurial world as this like put together, perfect, neurotypical, type A, successful woman. They can come and be themselves, have ADHD, have ASD, be loud, be introverted, be whoever they are, and find the way that works for them rather than paying this business coach $10,000 to tell them this is the way that worked for me and it will work for you too if you do it right.
I love that so much. And like, I'm cheering for you and your community, because so much money is wasted by ADHDers and other neurodivergent folks on getting a prescription, so to speak, of how to do, how to do business the right way, or how to do motherhood the right way, or how to do like whatever, you fill in the blank, the successful way. But we're taking lessons from people who don't have the same brain as we do. And it does not make any sense. And so what that just leads to is more shame, more self-judgment, more feeling like I'm doing something wrong. I'm the problem here. I'm the one that like this method isn't working for me. So I guess I need to change me. Not, hey, let's look at the method. Let's see if this even works for an ADHD brain. Let's see if this works for someone who functions a little bit differently. And I can tell you when I look at like, business coaches and all these people out there, these self-development gurus saying like, you have to be consistent to be successful. And like, you have to get up and work out at 5 a.m. and you have to like follow the 3 steps to being successful is consistency and perfection is like all, I'm just like, no. I just want to scream it from the rooftops. You actually don't have to be consistent to be successful. You don't. You can be very successful and be inconsistent as long as you're willing to try again and again and again and be persistent toward your goals. And that's just a little tangent because that is a like passion topic of mine. But just knowing that like, are you getting advice from people who believe in nuance and see the differences in people's brain? Or are you getting advice from people who see the world in black and white and think that everyone should be just like them? I think that is a question that we should all be asking ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I spent that was a huge part of my journey, was spending a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money on people teaching me how to do it like they did. And usually it was in a group setting. So there were other people who were doing all of the things and it was working for them. And that is such a shitty place to be when it's like, I'm doing everything you're telling me to do. I'm doing everything you're telling me is going to work. I'm doing everything she's doing and it's working for her. So what the fuck is wrong with me?
Yeah,
Clearly
exactly.
something.
Yep, exactly. Or I can't get myself to do these steps that you've laid out. Why can everyone else get themselves to do it? And everyone else is just like, they're making a list and they're crossing it off. And it's just like, oh, I scheduled on my calendar to do this at 9 a.m. So I'm going to do it at 9 a.m. And I'm looking around the room saying, how are you people doing this? How are you all just like, you just make a plan and then you implement the plan? Like, what are you even talking about? And of course, now I'm pretty far into my healing journey where I am able to get myself to do the things for the most part. But I didn't start out that way. I started out on my couch watching daytime TV, wondering why everyone else had a full-time job. And I was watching daytime TV and really, really poor. Like that's where I started, right? So it's been a long journey.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit to what ADHD actually is. You touched on it a little bit. We think it's the little boy bouncing around in the classroom, or like the naughty kid, or for me, it was always, my leg was always tapping. And that's what we think is like, you can't sit still. But I have discovered in large part, thanks to your podcast, that it really is about so much else. So tell us, I mean, we're barely scratching the surface on ADHD in this 30-minute interview, but tell us the overarching view of what ADHD really is.
Sure. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which is a terrible name because it doesn't have anything to do actually with an attention deficit. I have just as much attention as everyone else. The issue is I have trouble regulating my attention. So ADHD is actually a disorder of self-regulation. And so if you can think about it in that way, it's going to make a lot of sense. I have trouble regulating my attention, meaning I have plenty of attention, 100% attention, just like you have, but I'm going to have a lot of trouble keeping my attention focused on the thing that matters most. And so when something else steals my attention, whether it's an intrusive thought, an emotion that I'm experiencing really deeply that I just can't, I'm so distracted by, or the guy outside mowing the lawn, I'm going to struggle to regulate my attention and keep it on the task in front of me if there's all these other things happening around me. And so I struggle to regulate my attention. I struggle to regulate my emotions. So someone with ADHD really struggles with emotional dysregulation, meaning that we feel our emotions extremely intensely and we struggle to self-soothe. We don't have the self-soothe button. Like, where is that button? I missed it in the manual. I don't have it. So self-soothing is a skill that we need to learn. And so many of us ADHDers are walking around distracted by our emotions, which is not something that we talk about very often. And then I also struggle to regulate my behavior. So I'm really impulsive. Somebody with ADHD is impulsive. They can make really rash decisions. And we just struggle to kind of just like, as I said earlier, just do the daily tasks that everyone else is just doing. Like, my husband gets up and then he does the dishes and he has a cup of coffee and he just does all of these adulting tasks. And I'm just sitting on the couch looking at him like, I don't understand how you human, because I human in a very different way. And so if we can just understand kind of like in an umbrella term that ADHD is not a deficit of attention, it's an inability to regulate attention, emotion, and behavior.
That's a great definition. I heard something the other day. I don't think it was your podcast. I think it was something else, but they were talking about how a lot of people are starting to refer to ADHD as executive function disorder instead. Mm-hmm. Have you heard that?
I have heard that tossed around. Yeah. And I'm in favor of that. If that's what we want to call it, I think that's at least better than ADHD. I mean, that name is just, it sucks so much. And actually, when clinicians were moving from the DSM-4 to the DSM-5, they tried to have this conversation about renaming it. They tried to have consensus on adult assessment questions, and they never could come to consensus. And so the name remains the same. And the questions used for diagnosis were created for children, not for adults, which is ludicrous.
Yeah, it's the same with autism spectrum disorder. That's part of the reason they have a really hard time diagnosing adults with that is because all of the tests are made for children, which is crazy.
It is crazy making. Yes. It's so frustrating. And it's such an injustice. It is such an injustice. Yeah. That's a whole other podcast though.
Yeah. Right. So the majority of the women who listen to this podcast are entrepreneurs, they're business owners, or they're at least aspiring entrepreneurs and business owners. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you see as being unique challenges to entrepreneurs who have ADHD. You know, you and I talked a little bit about this before we started recording, is that for me, looking back, I can see elements of ADHD and I can see that it was present my whole life. But I've also heard that it's common for adults to get diagnosed when they leave school because they no longer have that structure. I love how I'm probably just telling you all the things that I learned from your podcast. I'm like, listen to this, Kristen. You're like, you literally learned that from me. And for me, it was, my parents have asked me like, why is this all of a sudden a thing? Like, you're 42. And for me, I think it really was that switch of going from being full-time employed by someone else, where the expectations and the routine and the consequences were all created for me, to 4 years ago, becoming completely self-employed full-time, where there was no structure, no routine, no real immediate consequences necessarily. Then that was when it became a big challenge for me. So I'm just curious, like, what you see as some of the unique challenges that entrepreneurs with ADHD face.
First, I want to say I love entrepreneurs so much. I love being an entrepreneur. I've never not been an entrepreneur. I love it so much. And I think that for the most part, it's such a great endeavor for someone with an ADHD brain. It really is. But as you mentioned, not having a boss, not having structure laid out for you, not having, daily tasks that you're reporting to someone else for can be really, really challenging. And so I want to go back to the executive functions that you mentioned, because I think it's a great way to weave the two conversations together. So executive functions are essentially the skills that allow us to adult. They're the skills that allow us to manage ourselves and reach our goals. And they're housed in the frontal lobe. So if you were to like tap your forehead, that's where your frontal lobe is. And for someone with ADHD, our frontal lobe is underdeveloped. And so that means that our executive functioning is really impacted. And so here are the executive functions, and I'm going to kind of tie them back to entrepreneurship. So first we have self-awareness. People with ADHD struggle to be self-aware. Well, self-awareness is a pretty important skill for somebody who's an entrepreneur. Next, inhibition, being able to curb your impulses and not do the fun things, but do the things that you need to do, the hard tasks. Then we have working memory. And girl, we could talk for hours about working memory, because that is your ability to keep the task in your mind long enough to accomplish it. So how many times have you been like, I'm going to do this thing today? And then you have every intention. It's not like you don't want to do it, but you just don't keep it in your mind long enough to get it done. Or you start it, you get distracted, and you never remember to come back to it. Not because you're a bad person, not because you don't care about the client that you're working for, but just because like out of sight, out of mind, we don't have the working memory to just remember to finish the thing. Next, emotional regulation, which we could talk for hours about as well. When you are emotionally activated, it's very hard to create an Instagram post talking about your company and put it on social. When you are emotionally activated, it's very hard to write a sales email, right? Mm-hmm. And so we need to develop the skill of emotional regulation just so that we can function and move forward in our businesses. I have two more. Self-motivation, my goodness. This is a huge issue with an ADHD entrepreneur because we struggle with self-motivation. We have lower levels of dopamine, which means the mundane, boring tasks make us feel like we want to die. They're not just boring. They're like debilitating. If I have to do the books for my company, it is impending doom. Like I cannot do it. So because we have lower levels of dopamine, we struggle to activate and just get started on the tasks, just the simple tasks. And this goes back to how come everyone else in the group can just like do this shit and I can't? And that's the reason why. Last one is a cluster. It is planning, problem solving, and organization. One of the key skills of being an entrepreneur is being able to plan and problem solve and organize. Now, I want to have a caveat here. It's not problem solving like a big picture. We're amazing at big picture problem solving. I'm talking problem solving like the nitty gritty details of like my Excel spreadsheet does not match my bank account. And this is a problem that needs to be solved, except there's 100 steps and it's very detail oriented. I have to go through everything. And I think I'll just go drink a bottle of wine or sit on the couch and watch Netflix instead, because like I would rather do anything but this task. Mm-hmm. And so because we struggle with those 6 executive functions, an ADHD entrepreneur has some very, very unique struggles, meaning that we are going to be amazing at the thing we're amazing at, and we're going to really suck at everything else. Does it sound familiar, Melissa?
It does, yes. Actually, many of the things that you're saying, one of the first things I told my virtual assistant was like, listen, this is one of the first things I tell most people I meet. I have the worst memory ever. So just know that it's not personal, and you're probably going to have to tell me 94 more times. And you're probably going to have to email me and be like, hi, where's that thing I asked you for 9 times?
And I will be grateful that you did nag me about that. I'm not going to get mad at you, and I'm not going to be like, leave me alone. I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'll do it right now.
Yeah. That's one of the big things that I've learned since my diagnosis is being okay asking for what I need and also giving other people permission. Like people will ask me for something when I'm out and about doing something, or I run into them at a meeting or a networking event or something. And I will tell them like, or they'll say, oh, I would love to grab coffee with you sometime and chat. I'm like, yes, let's do that. I will reach out to you. Usually I say, reach out to me because I know I'm going to forget in 5 seconds. But if it's something where I need to reach out to them, I will say to them, like, I may forget this. Please don't feel bad bringing it up to me again. I want you to bring it up to me again because I have a terrible memory. And so finding those kind of workarounds and ways to just accept, like, this is how I am. I'm owning that. I'm sharing with you that this is how I am. And here's how we can both be okay with it has been very empowering and also really helped me to actually get things done.
Yes. And that goes back to just accepting your diagnosis, accepting that your brain works a little bit differently, accepting that you're not going to fit in the box that everyone else does. And knowing that, like, hey, I'm talking to a human and I can be vulnerable enough to say, like, hey, I would love to get coffee with you, but I know I won't remember to reach out. Do you mind reaching out to me? Because I would love that. And then the other human gets to decide, like, no, it's not worth it for me to reach out to you. Well, I guess we're not having coffee then. No problem.
Right.
Like, that's not a problem for me. But being able, I think once we begin to truly accept, like, understand ADHD and accept who we are and what it means for us, then we can just start externalizing our needs just a little bit. I mean, it is so small to say to someone, yes, let's get coffee. You reach out to me and I am there. That's so small. That's not a big ask.
Yeah, absolutely. But in order to get to that space, you have to accept your diagnosis. You have to be okay with it. And you have to, I also think there's an element of letting go of the shame and the, whatever other feelings come along with that diagnosis of, I never really struggled with shame because I feel like I've spent my whole life thinking I was different than everyone else. So like I dealt with that a long time ago. But there is that element for a lot of people of being okay with saying, like, this is how I am. Can you accommodate it? Can you help me with it? That's really hard for a lot of people. And I get that too.
Yeah. I mean, most people with ADHD are working so hard to pretend that they don't have ADHD.
Yeah.
And that is so draining. It's so exhausting. And it sucks a lot of our energy. We talk about spoon theory in my program a lot. Like, so many of our spoons usually are going to just trying to do everything like everyone else and pretend that we don't have ADHD. How much more energy and capacity could we get back if we just acknowledge, like, this is who I am, and not be rude about it and not have expectations that go beyond, that are making other people serve us constantly, but being able to just externalize, like, this is a desire that I have and I'm going to need some help with it. And so who's the right person? And I love that you have an assistant. I think that every person with ADHD, and I know that, like, access and privilege is just really difficult, but if you have money, hire someone to help you. That is like the first thing we need to do, because hire the neurotypicals to take care of the tasks that you don't care about. And it's not tasks that are too hard for you or that you can't do. It's just the tasks that you know you're going to delay and procrastinate, that you say, I should do that, I should do that, I should do that, but you just never do because you hate it, because you have lower levels of dopamine and it feels like death when you're trying to, like, get the thing done. Just hire someone else to do that for you if you can.
So what you're saying is I need to hire someone to come into my house and wash and dry and chop the produce that I buy every single week and put it in my mouth.
Yeah. Or give yourself the grace to say, I'm going to spend a little bit more money on on produce that is already washed and already cut.
Yeah.
Like that is where I'm at, where I'm just like, I could invest my time and my capacity in chopping it, but I'm not sure that I will, because history tells me that I let it go bad every single week. And so why don't I spend a little bit more money to have it washed and cut for me and make it easy? When I'm in the grocery store and I think I could chop that, I'm like, Kristen, I call that a problematic positive thought. It's problematic because it's not like I could do a lot of things, Melissa. I could do a lot of things, but I'm not going to chop those veggies. I'll tell you what.
Yeah. But every single time I'm in the grocery store, God damn it, I am determined I'm going to chop those veggies.
Yeah.
This is going to be the week
right,
that everything turns around. I become a meal prepper. It's going to be amazing.
Oh, okay, it's so good.
So what are some things, if people are listening to this podcast, maybe because they were curious about ADHD, maybe they have suspected that they might have it, or people who do have it, are there some tips that you have for those people or advice that you have for them in terms of, we've talked about several of them already, but just in terms of being successful as an entrepreneur?
For sure. So I would first start with the very basic foundation is get a diagnosis and figure out a treatment plan that works for you. Most people have a lot of success with medication, and it is research shows us that it is the best treatment for ADHD. Other people don't, they just can't really tolerate it. About 10% of people can't really tolerate ADHD medication, or they choose not to be medically treated. And so find a treatment plan that works for you. That might look like medication. That might look like therapy. That might look like a really rigorous exercise program, really paying attention to your diet, functional medicine, blah, 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 blah. That foundation, like without the foundation of diagnosis, understanding, and treatment, I wouldn't even bother with the other stuff. Honestly, everyone turn up the volume and listen. If you're not diagnosed and treated, if you have ADHD, but you're not diagnosed and treating it somehow, the other stuff is just not going to really be able to be implemented long-term, because inevitably your ADHD will bite you in the butt and will make it so that you're not able to implement skills long-term. But once you have that foundation of diagnosis and treatment, after that, I would really encourage everyone to sit down and really understand what the priorities are in your business. As an entrepreneur, there are hundreds, if not thousands of things vying for your attention. And the ADHD brain does not prioritize well. We hear every task at the same volume, so to speak. So every task is kind of screaming at us like, do the books. No, do Instagram. No, write an email. No, do this. And so we're constantly pulled in 100 different directions. And so if you can really understand what your priorities are and externalize them, so write them down, put them in front of you everywhere on your desk, on your computer monitor, on your bathroom mirror, like these are the priorities. That is going to be huge for you. And you might want to elicit the help of someone like Melissa or somebody who is going to really understand how to walk you through, figuring out your priorities. You might need to employ a neurotypical to help you do that, whatever. But understanding your priorities are key because, like I said, there's hundreds, if not thousands of tasks vying for your attention. And if you are putting your precious time, energy, capacity, creativity on stuff that doesn't matter, that's going to be real frustrating. And any ADHD entrepreneur is going to be like, I have been there. And I will raise my hand so high and say, I have been there. And so now I know that my priorities are coaching and podcasting. Now, if I want to coach and podcast, I'm also going to need to sell. And so selling goes in that as well. And so any task for me personally that does not go into coaching, podcasting, or selling, it's not for me. And so even within those three categories, I'm going to need to decide, okay, what's the best way to implement coaching? So I used to coach one-on-one and do groups and have a membership, like all this stuff. And now I'm just like, no, we're keeping it so simple. I have a membership. That's it. That's the best way for me to serve as many people as possible all over the world. What's the best way for me to podcast? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Like, no, I have it so simple. I have it streamlined to make it so easy. Actually, it's never easy. Podcasting is always hard, but I make it as easy as I can. And then selling. I mean, it's just going to depend on who you talk to. There's 100 ways to sell. How do I sell in a way that feels ethical, in a way that feels aligned for me? And so having your priorities and really externalizing them and focusing on them and bringing your attention back to them. Like if you're holding a flashlight, this is from the book, Pay Attention to Your Attention by Dr. Amishi Josh. She's amazing. She talks about your attention is like a flashlight, and where you shine your flashlight is where you shine your attention. Now, this is from me. ADHDers don't have flashlights. We have disco balls. We are reflecting that attention in a million different directions. And so what we need to do is really, 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 really put so many boundaries in place for ourselves so that our attention is streamlined and our brilliant brains can focus on what is most important.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I love the do not disturb feature on my cell phone.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I love being able to turn off so many notifications, not having all of the apps on the phone. So I have to actually come in this room if I'm going to do those things. Like you find a lot of little things to implement. I tried to do the controls on the phone that are like, don't let me be on Facebook for more than 45 minutes today.
No, it's not going to work.
No, because I know the password.
Yeah, of course. I purchased what I call a phone jail, which is like this little plastic device that have you seen it?
Like a cookie jar.
Yes. And you set the timer. I think that's actually what it's meant for, which to me is very sad. So like all of the body positivity around here and like, you don't need to lock your food away, guys, but you do need to lock your phone away.
We're going to market it as a phone jail.
Yeah. It's phone jail. And so years ago when I was trying to start the podcast, but I couldn't get myself to do it, I would lock my phone away in the phone jail for 2 hours. And there's literally no way to break into it. Like you would have to get out like a saw and saw it open if you want it. But any of those hacks that keep you from just impulsively doing the things that are not where you want your attention to go. Any hack that you can come up with like that is amazing. And truly, emotional regulation is just a huge part of this. And so the reason why we pick up our phone is because we're uncomfortable, because we're bored, because we're agitated or afraid. And so if I can learn to regulate and soothe my own emotions, that is also a very helpful skill in entrepreneurship.
Yes, absolutely. This is so good. I feel like I have like 95 other questions that I want to ask you. And this podcast interview could be like, let's just go on all day. You don't have anything else to do you?
No, nothing.
Except we'll have to take periodic breaks because we'll both be like, wait, what were we talking about?
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been such helpful information. I know you have a podcast. I would love for you to direct people to that. And if there's any other way that they can contact you, reach out to you, find out more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. So I host the I Have ADHD podcast, and you can go check that out wherever you listen to your podcasts. I also have a lot of information on the website, ihaveadhd.com, including info about my coaching program where I help adults with ADHD. And it's just super fun. I love it so much. And I like to hang out on Instagram. So if you love social media, you can hit me up on Instagram at I Have ADHD Podcast.
Awesome. I will put the links for all of those in the show notes so everyone can connect with you. And thank you again, Kristen. You're awesome.
Thanks, Melissa.
thanks so much for listening to another episode of the podcast. I just love that you guys show up with me every single week. And I love recording these episodes and knowing that you are going to listen. And every time I hear a little nugget from these people, I'm like, oh, that's so good. I can't wait for you guys to hear that. So thank you for your loyalty and for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so that other people can find this podcast. And if you want to know about Kristen and more about the work that she's doing, I'm going to drop 2 links in the show notes. One is to follow her on Facebook. One is to follow her on Instagram. Okay, just kidding. 3 links. I can't count. And the third one is to check out her I Have ADHD podcast. It's amazing. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.